There was a time when a marriage proposal represented the culmination of love, commitment, and careful planning between two people who had built a foundation strong enough to support a lifetime together. When proposals happened, because both partners had discussed their future openly and honestly, and when rejection was rare, because couples communicated about their readiness before the question was formally asked. But what happened to Daniel Martinez on Steve Harvey's show would prove that sometimes the most devastating moment is when you realize you have been building a future with someone who was never on the same page, and that public proposals can reveal painful truths about relationships that were never as solid as one partner believed. When this 44-year-old man stood before America and described the moment his girlfriend of 5 years rejected his carefully planned proposal in front of their families and friends, Steve Harvey delivered a response that cut through the embarrassment and heartbreak to reveal the real issues that had been hiding beneath the surface of their relationship all along. What happened next showed millions of viewers that a rejected proposal is not the end of your story, but sometimes the beginning of understanding what you truly deserve. If you believe that marriage should be built on mutual commitment rather than one person hoping the other will eventually be ready, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. What you are about to witness is a man learning the difference between loving someone and being loved in return, and the moment when painful clarity became the first step toward genuine healing. Daniel Martinez was 44 years old, a civil engineer who managed infrastructure projects for the city of San Diego, and a devoted father to his 8-year-old son from his first marriage, which had ended in divorce 7 years earlier. He had been in a relationship with his girlfriend Michelle for 5 years, and throughout that time, he had believed they were building toward a future together, working through the normal challenges of blending families and balancing demanding careers, while creating a partnership that would eventually lead to marriage. Daniel had never imagined that when he finally proposed, the answer would be anything other than yes. Daniel had grown up in a close-knit Mexican-American family in Southern California, the son of parents who had been married for over 50 years and who had modeled commitment, partnership, and the kind of enduring love that weathers all challenges. His father had worked as a mechanic and his mother as a seamstress, and together they had built a stable life for their 4 children through hard work and mutual support. Daniel had absorbed these values deeply, believing that marriage was the foundation of family life, and that when you found the right person, you committed to them fully and built a life together. Daniel's first marriage had ended when his son was only 1 year old. His ex-wife had struggled with substance abuse issues that had ultimately made the marriage unsustainable despite Daniel's efforts to support her recovery. The divorce had been painful and difficult, but Daniel had focused on being the best father he could be to his son, who lived with him full-time while his ex-wife worked on her sobriety and maintained supervised visitation. For 2 years after his divorce, Daniel had concentrated entirely on his career and his son, not interested in dating until he felt ready to bring someone into his carefully reconstructed life. He had met Michelle at a professional conference 3 years after his divorce. She was a marketing director for a large retail company, intelligent and ambitious, with a quick wit that had drawn Daniel to her immediately. Michelle had been divorced for 5 years and had no children from her marriage. When they began dating, she had seemed understanding about Daniel's responsibilities as a single father and supportive of his close relationship with his son. Their relationship had developed gradually, with Michelle becoming more involved in Daniel's life and meeting his extended family, all of whom welcomed her warmly. Throughout their 5 years together, Daniel had been clear about his intentions. He wanted to remarry eventually, wanted to give his son a stable family structure, wanted to build a life with a partner who shared his values and his vision for the future. Michelle had never explicitly disagreed with these goals, but she had also never fully embraced them. Whenever Daniel brought up marriage, Michelle would say she was not quite ready yet, that she wanted to focus on her career for a bit longer, that they should just enjoy what they had without pressure. Daniel had interpreted these responses as normal caution from someone who had been through a difficult divorce and needed time to be sure about taking that step again. But looking back, Daniel could see warning signs he had ignored or minimized. Michelle had never fully integrated into his family the way he had hoped, often finding excuses to miss family gatherings or leaving early when she did attend. She had maintained significant emotional distance from Daniel's son, being pleasant but never developing the kind of bond that would be necessary if they were to become a family. She had kept her own apartment throughout their relationship, despite Daniel's suggestions that they consider moving in together as a step toward marriage. She had been vague about future plans, redirecting conversations about the long term to focus on immediate concerns. Daniel had told himself these were just aspects of Michelle's personality, that she was independent and career-focused and needed space in a way that was different from what he was used to, but not necessarily problematic. He had convinced himself that she just needed more time, that eventually she would be ready to take the next step, that her commitment to the relationship would deepen if he was patient and supportive enough. He had invested 5 years in believing that Michelle was moving toward the same future he envisioned, even as her actions suggested she was content to keep things exactly as they were. The decision to propose had come after what Daniel thought was a breakthrough in their relationship. Michelle had attended a family wedding with him, where she seemed more engaged than usual, dancing with his relatives and staying through the entire reception rather than leaving early as she often did. She had commented positively about the ceremony and seemed moved by the couple's vows. Daniel had interpreted this as a sign that she was finally ready to consider marriage seriously, that she was opening herself to the possibility of that level of commitment. Encouraged by this apparent shift, Daniel had spent 2 months planning an elaborate proposal. He had arranged a gathering at a beautiful restaurant overlooking the ocean, inviting both their families and their closest friends under the pretense of a casual dinner party. He had worked with the restaurant staff to coordinate the timing, selecting a moment during dessert when he would get down on one neat knee and ask Michelle to marry him in front of everyone who mattered to both of them. He had purchased a ring that he thought perfectly suited her taste, spending more than he could comfortably afford because he wanted everything about the proposal to reflect how much he valued her and their relationship. Daniel had told himself that a public proposal would be romantic and memorable, that Michelle would appreciate the gesture of declaring his commitment in front of their families, that the presence of people who loved them would make the moment even more special. He had never seriously considered that she might say no. In his mind, the only question was whether she would cry happy tears or be too overwhelmed to speak at first. The possibility of rejection had seemed so remote as to be not worth considering. The evening of the proposal had started perfectly. Michelle had dressed beautifully, seeming happy and relaxed as they greeted their families and friends at the restaurant. Conversation flowed easily, and everyone appeared to be enjoying themselves. Daniel's son sat next to him, aware of what was going to happen and excited about the possibility of Michelle becoming part of their family officially. Daniel's parents beamed with approval, clearly hoping that their son would finally have the stable marriage and complete family structure they believed he deserved. As dessert was served, Daniel stood up to make what everyone assumed would be a simple toast. He began by talking about how much Michelle meant to him, about the 5 years they had spent together, about his hopes for their future. He could see some of their friends exchanging knowing looks, beginning to realize what was happening. His son was grinning with anticipation. Daniel's mother had tears already forming in her eyes. Then Daniel got down on one knee, pulled out the ring box, and asked Michelle to marry him. The words he had rehearsed so carefully came out with genuine emotion. He told her he loved her, that he wanted to spend his life with her, that he hoped she would do him the honor of becoming his wife. He opened the ring box to reveal the diamond he had chosen so carefully, and he waited for the yes that he had never doubted would come. Michelle's face went pale. She looked at Daniel kneeling before her, then at the ring, then at the faces of all their families and friends watching expectantly. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. When Michelle finally spoke, Her voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. She said she was sorry. She said she could not do this. She said no. The shock that went through the room was palpable. Daniel remained frozen on one knee, his mind unable to process what had just happened. Michelle stood abruptly, grabbed her purse, and left the restaurant without another word to anyone. Daniel's son started crying, confused and upset by what he had witnessed. Daniel's mother rushed to her grandson while Daniel's father helped Daniel to his feet. Their friends sat in uncomfortable silence, unsure how to respond to the public rejection they had just witnessed. Daniel felt as though he was moving through water. Everything slowed down and distant. He apologized to everyone for the awkward situation, assured them that they should stay and enjoy the meal he had already paid for, and took his son home. The drive back to their house was silent, except for his son's occasional sniffles. Daniel tucked his son into bed, promising him that everything would be okay, even though he had no idea if that was true, and then sat alone in his living room, trying to understand what had just happened. Michelle had sent a text message later that night, saying she was sorry for how things had gone, that she should have been clearer with him about where she stood, that she thought he knew she was not ready for marriage and might never be. Daniel read the message multiple times, each reading making him feel worse. She thought he knew. How could he have known when she had never explicitly said she did not want to marry him? How could he have known when she had spent 5 years in a relationship with him, meeting his family, integrating into his life to some degree, never definitively ending things or setting clear boundaries about her intentions? The days following the rejected proposal were among the worst of Daniel's life. The humiliation of the public rejection was compounded by having to explain to his son what had happened and why Michelle was no longer coming around. His son, who had begun to think of Michelle as potentially becoming part of their family, was confused and hurt, asking if he had done something wrong to make Michelle not want to be with them. Daniel tried to explain that adult relationships were complicated and that Michelle's decision had nothing to do with him, but he could see that his son did not fully believe it. Daniel also had to face his extended family, all of whom had witnessed the rejection and had questions and opinions about what had happened. His mother was angry at Michelle for humiliating her son in front of everyone. His father was concerned that Daniel had misjudged the relationship so badly. His siblings were sympathetic, but also seemed to view the situation as evidence that Daniel needed to be more discerning about who he invested time in. Everyone had advice about what he should have done differently, how he should have known Michelle was not serious about the relationship, why he should have had clearer conversations about marriage before proposing. The advice, though well-intentioned, made Daniel feel worse rather than better. He had thought he was being patient and understanding by not pressuring Michelle about marriage for 5 years. He had thought he was being respectful of her need for independence by not insisting they move in together. He had thought he was building a foundation slowly and carefully so that when they did get married, it would be strong and lasting. But apparently he had been misreading the entire situation, investing in a future that Michelle had never committed to and assuming progress toward marriage when Michelle had been content to keep things indefinitely as they were. Daniel tried to contact Michelle several times in the week after the proposal to have a conversation about what had happened and what it meant for their relationship. She responded with brief texts saying she needed space and time to think. 2 weeks after the proposal, she finally agreed to meet him for coffee. Daniel arrived hoping for clarity, for explanation, for some understanding of where things had gone so wrong. What he got instead was a conversation that left him feeling even more confused and hurt. Michelle explained that she cared about Daniel but had never felt the kind of certainty about marriage that she thought she should feel before committing to someone for life. She said she had enjoyed their relationship as it was, but had never wanted the kind of traditional family structure that Daniel clearly wanted. She said she had assumed he understood that her reluctance to discuss marriage meant she was not interested in it, at least not any time in the foreseeable future. She claimed she had been clear about this, though Daniel could not recall any conversation where she had explicitly said she did not want to marry him. When Daniel pointed out that she had spent 5 years with him, met his family repeatedly, and become involved in his life in ways that suggested serious commitment, Michelle said she had never intended to mislead him, but that she had thought they were just enjoying being together without any pressure about the future. When Daniel asked why she had never explicitly told him she did not want marriage if that was how she felt, Michelle became defensive, saying it was not her responsibility to manage his expectations and that he should have paid more attention to her actions rather than hoping she would eventually change her mind about what she wanted. The conversation ended with Michelle suggesting they take a break from the relationship to give them both time to figure out what they wanted. Daniel left the coffee shop feeling worse than before they had talked. He had gone hoping for understanding and had instead been told that the relationship he thought they were building had been something entirely different in Michelle's mind, that his vision of their future was something she had never shared, and that somehow this massive disconnect was primarily his fault for not reading signals she claimed to have been sending. Daniel found himself replaying the entire 5-year relationship in his mind, looking for the moments where Michelle had been clear about not wanting marriage. There had been times she had said she was not ready yet, but Daniel had interpreted that as meaning not ready now rather than not ready ever. There had been times she had changed the subject when he brought up future plans, but he had thought she was just uncomfortable with pressure rather than fundamentally opposed to the idea. There had been times she had maintained distance from his family and his son, but he had attributed that to her independent personality rather than lack of commitment to becoming part of his family. Had he been willfully blind to signs that should have been obvious, or had Michelle been genuinely unclear about her intentions while benefiting from a relationship that met her current needs without requiring her to commit to Daniel's vision of the future? Daniel could not settle on an answer. He felt angry at Michelle for not being more direct about her lack of interest in marriage when she knew how important it was to him. But he also felt angry at himself for investing 5 years in a relationship with someone who apparently had never been fully committed to building the future he wanted. The impact on Daniel's relationship with his son added another layer of pain to the situation. His son had been excited about the possibility of Michelle becoming part of their family, and her rejection of the proposal had hurt him in ways Daniel had not fully anticipated. His son became more clingy and anxious, worried that Daniel might leave him too, or that something he did might cause other people in their life to disappear. Daniel found himself reassuring his son constantly that he would always be there, that nothing could make him leave, but he could see that the proposal disaster had shaken his son's sense of security in ways that would take time to repair. 4 months after the rejected proposal, Daniel was still struggling to move forward emotionally. He and Michelle had officially ended their relationship, though the breakup had felt almost anticlimactic after the dramatic public rejection. Michelle had been matter of fact about the split, treating it as an inevitable conclusion to their incompatibility rather than as the painful end of a 5-year investment. Daniel had expected more emotion from her, but she had seemed almost relieved to be free of expectations she had never wanted to meet. Daniel's sister Maria, watching her brother struggle with depression and self-doubt, suggested he might benefit from getting away from San Diego for a few days. She had secured tickets to a taping of Steve Harvey's show in Los Angeles and thought it might help Daniel to be around people and energy and laughter instead of sitting at home, replaying the proposal rejection in his mind. Daniel initially declined, unable to imagine pretending to be entertained when he felt so empty inside. But Maria persisted, arguing that Daniel needed to hear from someone with perspective about relationships and commitment, someone who could help him understand what had happened and how to move forward. Daniel finally agreed to go, viewing it as a way to make his sister happy if nothing else. The morning of the show, he dressed in the dark blue shirt that had always been one of his favorites, the same shirt he had been wearing the night he met Michelle at that conference 5 years ago. He wondered briefly if wearing it was a mistake, a reminder of the relationship that had ended so badly, but decided it did not matter. Nothing seemed to matter very much anymore. The Steve Harvey show was energetic and warm, exactly the kind of environment that Daniel needed, even though he could not fully appreciate it yet. He sat in the audience trying to engage with the show, trying to laugh at the right moments, trying to be present when all he could think about was the humiliation of being rejected in front of everyone he cared about. Then Steve announced a segment about proposals, commitment, and the importance of being on the same page with your partner before taking the step of asking them to marry you. Daniel felt his heart rate accelerate as Steve described situations where one partner was ready for marriage while the other was content to keep things as they were indefinitely, where proposals happened without clear prior communication about both people's readiness, and where rejection revealed fundamental disconnects that had been hiding beneath the surface of relationships. When Steve asked if anyone in the audience had experienced a rejected proposal, Daniel found his sister Maria raising his hand for him before he could decide whether he wanted to share his story publicly. The production assistant brought Daniel down to the stage, and Steve greeted him with genuine warmth and interest. Steve asked Daniel to share what had happened, and standing on that stage in front of hundreds of strangers and millions of viewers, Daniel told his story. He talked about 5 years with Michelle, about believing they were building toward a future together, about the carefully planned proposal in front of both families, and about the shock and humiliation of her saying no in front of everyone. He talked about the conversation afterward where Michelle had claimed she thought he knew she was not interested in marriage despite never explicitly saying so. He talked about feeling like he had wasted 5 years on someone who was never committed to the future he wanted. When Daniel finished speaking, Steve stood quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful and compassionate. When Steve finally spoke, his voice was gentle but direct. "Daniel, I want to start by saying something important. You did not waste 5 years. You invested 5 years in learning exactly what you need in a partner and what happens when you ignore warning signs because you want a relationship to be something it is not. That is not wasted time. That is education, even though it is painful education." The audience murmured in agreement, and Steve continued with growing conviction. "No, let me address what actually happened here, because I think there is a lot of confusion about who is responsible for what went wrong. Michelle is responsible for not being clear with you about her intentions and her lack of interest in marriage. If she knew you wanted to get married and she knew she did not want that, she had an obligation to tell you directly rather than just avoiding the conversation and hoping you would figure it out on your own." Steve's voice grew stronger. "But Daniel, and I need you to hear this, you are responsible for ignoring every sign that Michelle was showing you about her level of commitment. She would not move in with you. She kept emotional distance from your son. She avoided your family gatherings. She changed the subject every time you brought up marriage. She never once in 5 years said definitively that she wanted to marry you. All of those things were her telling you through her actions what she could not or would not say with her words." The audience was silent as Steve continued. "When someone shows you through their behavior that they are not fully committed to you, you cannot love them into changing that. You cannot wait patiently enough to make them ready. You cannot be understanding enough to make them want what you want. All you can do is see their behavior for what it actually is and decide whether that level of commitment is enough for you." Steve paused before delivering his next point. "You asked this woman to marry you after 5 years without ever having a direct conversation where she said, 'Yes, I want to marry you too. I want to build a future with you. I am working toward that same goal.' Daniel, if you have to wonder whether someone wants to marry you, they do not want to marry you. If you are hoping that one day they will be ready, they are already telling you they are not interested. If you are waiting for them to catch up to where you are emotionally, you are not in the same relationship as they are." He continued with even more intensity. "The public proposal was a mistake, and I need you to understand why. Public proposals work when 2 people have already discussed marriage, when they both know they want to get married, and the only question is when and how the formal proposal will happen. Public proposals are disasters when one person is hoping that social pressure will push the other person to say yes when they would otherwise say no. That is not romantic. That is manipulative, even if you did not consciously intend it that way. Steve's voice softened slightly but remained firm. I know you did not see it as manipulation. You saw it as a grand romantic gesture. But think about what you were actually doing. You were putting Michelle in a position where saying no meant embarrassing you in front of both families and disappointing everyone who was expecting a happy moment. You were using social pressure as a tool to get the answer you wanted. And when she said no anyway, that tells you how strongly she did not want to marry you, because she was willing to face all that awkwardness and disapproval rather than say yes to something she did not want. The audience seemed uncomfortable with this direct assessment, but Steve pressed forward. Now I am going to tell you something else you need to hear. Your son is 8 years old. You brought him to watch you propose to a woman who had never fully bonded with him, who had kept emotional distance from him for 5 years, who had never committed to being a parental figure in his life. When she said no, your son felt rejected too. He felt like he was not enough to make her want to be part of your family. That is a lot to put on a child. Steve's expression was compassionate, but his words were tough. When you are a parent, your relationships are not just about you and your partner. They are about what you are teaching your child about love, commitment, and self-respect. By staying with someone for 5 years who was not fully committed to you or to him, by hoping she would eventually be ready, by proposing without being certain she wanted to marry you, you taught your son some lessons you probably did not intend to teach. You taught him that love means accepting less than full commitment. You taught him that you should wait around hoping someone will choose you. You taught him that your happiness matters less than holding on to a relationship that is not giving you what you need. Daniel felt tears forming in his eyes as Steve continued. Here is what I think happened in your relationship. Michelle liked you well enough. She enjoyed having a boyfriend and doing couple things and having someone in her life, but she never wanted the full commitment of marriage and blended family. She never wanted to be a stepmother to your son. She never wanted to merge her life with yours in the way you wanted to merge yours with hers. And instead of being honest about that from the beginning, she let the relationship continue because it was comfortable for her, and she assumed you would eventually accept that this was all she was willing to give. Steve's voice grew more passionate. That is selfish, Daniel. She was selfish for not being clear. But you were also not taking responsibility for accepting a relationship that was not meeting your needs because you were hoping it would eventually become what you wanted it to be. Hope is not a relationship strategy. Hope is what you do when you are ignoring reality. He looked directly at Daniel with both compassion and steel in his expression. So here is what I want you to learn from this experience. First, when someone shows you through their actions that they are not fully committed to you, believe their actions, not your hopes. Second, when you are a parent, you need to prioritize finding a partner who is genuinely excited about being part of your family, not someone who tolerates your child because they want to date you. Third, before you propose to anyone ever again, you need to have explicit conversations about marriage, about readiness, about goals and timelines, so that everyone is on the same page before you ask the question publicly. Steve paused before delivering his final thoughts. You feel humiliated right now because the rejection was public, but Daniel, that public rejection may have been the best thing that could have happened to you. If Michelle had said yes because of social pressure, you would be married to someone who never really wanted to marry you. You would spend the rest of your life wondering when she was going to leave, or whether she resented being trapped in a marriage she did not choose freely. The rejection, as painful as it was, freed you to find someone who actually wants what you want. His voice grew softer but no less intense. You are 44 years old. You have a beautiful son who needs you to model what healthy relationships look like. You have a lot of life ahead of you. Do not waste any more time on people who are not sure about you. Do not invest in someone who keeps you guessing about their commitment. Do not hope your way into a relationship that requires the other person to fundamentally change what they want. Find someone who is excited about you, about your son, about building a life together. Find someone who says yes enthusiastically, not because they are pressured, but because they genuinely want to marry you. Steve's final words rang through the studio. The right person for you will not need 5 years to figure out if they want to marry you. The right person will not keep emotional distance from your son. The right person will not avoid conversations about the future. The right person will be working toward that same future right alongside you, not hoping you will eventually accept something less than what you deserve. Michelle did you a favor by saying no, Daniel. She freed you to find that right person. Now go find her. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. Daniel stood on that stage, tears streaming down his face, but feeling something he had not felt in 4 months. Clarity, relief. The understanding that Michelle's rejection had not been about his worth, but about their incompatibility, that the relationship had failed not because he was unlovable, but because they wanted fundamentally different things. Steve had given him permission to stop blaming himself for the rejection and start seeing it as valuable information about what he needed to do differently in future relationships. When Daniel returned to his seat, Maria hugged him tightly and whispered that she was proud of him for being vulnerable enough to share his story. On the drive back to San Diego, Daniel felt different, lighter somehow despite the painful truths Steve had spoken. He had spent 4 months torturing himself about what he should have done differently in the relationship with Michelle. Steve had helped him see that the real mistake had not been in how he proposed, but in staying with someone who had shown him repeatedly through her actions that she was not fully committed to the future he wanted. Over the following weeks, Daniel began to rebuild his life with new clarity about what he needed and deserved. He focused on his relationship with his son, having honest conversations about what had happened with Michelle and what they had both learned about the importance of choosing people who genuinely want to be part of their family. His son gradually became less anxious as he saw his father healing and becoming more confident about what they deserved from future relationships. Daniel also started therapy to process not just the rejected proposal but the patterns in his relationships that had led him to stay with someone who was not right for him. The therapist helped him understand that he had a tendency to see potential in people and invest in that potential rather than accepting who they actually were in the present. This pattern had led him to ignore clear signals that Michelle was not interested in marriage because he was focused on the future he hoped they could have rather than the reality of the relationship they actually had. 2 months after his appearance on Steve Harvey's show, the producers reached out about doing a follow-up segment. Daniel agreed, wanting to share how Steve's direct words had helped him move forward from the humiliation and hurt of the public rejection. When Daniel walked onto Steve's stage for the second time, the change was visible. He stood taller, his eyes were clearer, and he moved with a confidence that had not been there before. Steve greeted him warmly and asked for an update. Daniel explained that he had ended all contact with Michelle and was focusing on healing and learning from the experience. He shared that he was in therapy working on recognizing warning signs earlier in relationships and being more honest with himself about whether someone's actions match his needs rather than hoping they will eventually change. Daniel also talked about the conversations he had been having with his son about healthy relationships and the importance of being with people who are excited about you rather than people you have to convince to choose you. He explained that his son had been watching carefully how Daniel handled the rejection and its aftermath, and that showing his son it was possible to heal from disappointment and emerge stronger had been more important than pretending the rejection had not hurt. Steve nodded with obvious satisfaction. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. You stopped wasting energy on trying to understand why Michelle rejected you and started using that energy to build a better future for yourself and your son. You recognized that her rejection was information about compatibility, not a judgment about your worth. That is growth, Daniel. That is wisdom earned through pain. 1 year after the rejected proposal, Daniel began dating again. This time his approach was fundamentally different. He was clear from the beginning about what he wanted, explaining to potential partners that he was looking for someone interested in marriage and in being a step-parent to his son, and that he was not interested in casual relationships or in waiting years to see if someone might eventually be ready for commitment. This directness filtered out people who were not on the same page, which felt difficult at first but ultimately saved everyone time and heartache. Daniel met Sarah, a divorced mother of 2 daughters, through mutual friends 6 months after he started dating again. Their connection was immediate and different from what he had experienced with Michelle. Sarah was warm and engaged from the beginning, genuinely interested in meeting his son and integrating their families. She talked openly about wanting to remarry and build a blended family. She made her intentions and her readiness clear through both her words and her actions. 18 months into their relationship, Daniel decided he was ready to propose. But this time his approach was completely different. He and Sarah had explicit conversations about marriage, about their readiness, about their vision for their blended family. They discussed timelines and expectations. They made sure both were enthusiastically committed to the same future. Only after those conversations did Daniel begin planning a proposal, and this time he chose an intimate moment rather than a public spectacle, proposing during a quiet dinner at home with just their 3 children present. Sarah said yes immediately, crying happy tears and hugging Daniel while their children celebrated around them. The difference between this proposal and the one with Michelle was stark. This time Daniel had no doubt about the answer because he and Sarah had built a foundation of clear communication and mutual commitment. This time the proposal was a formalization of a decision they had already made together rather than a question whose answer was uncertain. This time Daniel was not hoping or wondering but celebrating a future they were both enthusiastically building. 3 years after his rejected proposal to Michelle, Daniel and Sarah were married in a ceremony that celebrated both their love and their blended family. Daniel was invited back to Steve Harvey's show one final time to share the complete transformation of his life from the devastation of public rejection to the joy of a marriage built on mutual commitment and clear communication. During that final appearance, Steve asked Daniel what he would tell other people who had experienced rejected proposals or who were considering proposing to partners they were not sure about. Daniel looked directly into the camera and spoke with conviction earned through painful experience. I would tell them that if you have to wonder whether someone wants to marry you, they do not want to marry you. I would tell them that hope is not a relationship strategy, and that waiting for someone to be ready often means accepting that they will never be ready. I would tell them that public proposals are only romantic when both people have already agreed they want to get married. And I would tell them that a rejected proposal, as humiliating as it feels, is better than a reluctant yes that leads to a marriage where one person never really wanted to be there. He continued, his voice growing stronger. Most importantly, I would tell them that rejection is information, not judgment. Michelle's rejection told me we were incompatible, not that I was unlovable. It freed me to find Sarah, who was ready for exactly the kind of marriage and family I wanted. If Michelle had said yes because of social pressure, I would be stuck in a marriage with someone who resented being there, and I would never have met the woman who actually wants to build a life with me. Steve nodded approvingly before adding his own wisdom for the audience. This is what I want everyone to understand. When you propose to someone, you should already know the answer is going to be yes because you have had conversations about marriage and readiness. If you are hoping they will say yes, if you are using public pressure to push them toward yes, if you are uncertain about their answer, then you are not ready to propose. Take the time to build a foundation of clear communication first. Make sure you are both on the same page. And if they are not ready after a reasonable amount of time, that is information telling you they probably never will be ready, at least not with you. Daniel and Sarah's story became one of the most referenced segments in Steve Harvey's show history. It resonated with thousands of people who had experienced rejected proposals or who had stayed too long in relationships with partners who were never fully committed. The segment was shared in relationship counseling sessions, discussed in support groups for divorced individuals learning to date again, and referenced in countless conversations about the importance of clear communication before engagement. 5 years after his public rejection, Daniel looked back on that painful moment as the catalyst for the most important growth of his life. The humiliation had forced him to examine his patterns in relationships, to recognize his tendency to ignore warning signs because he wanted relationships to work, and to learn the difference between loving someone and being loved in return. Michelle's rejection had hurt tremendously, but it had freed him to find a partner who was genuinely excited about building a life with him and his son. If this story resonates with you, if you have experienced rejection, or if you are waiting for someone to be ready for commitment they may never want to give, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes the most important lesson we can learn is that when someone shows you through their actions that they are not fully committed, you should believe them rather than hoping they will change. Daniel Martinez proved that rejected proposals can be blessings in disguise, that painful clarity is better than false hope, and that the right person will enthusiastically choose you rather than needing to be convinced. Remember that you deserve someone who is certain about you, someone who is working toward the same future, and someone whose words and actions align in their commitment to building a life together.